Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone's had a great holiday, New Year's, Christmas, whatever y'all celebrate out there. We had a busy holiday, but now we're back to doing podcasts again. This will be the first show of the new year, so looking forward to getting my guest on tonight. And we're going to bring you up right away. We're going to get going here, and we've got Jeffery H. Haskell. Hi, Jeffrey. How you doing?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. So we were talking a little bit beforehand, and you're a neighbor of mine west, though a little further west, living in Utah, it sounds like. Hopefully, are you guys getting any weather this year? It's been so freaking dry here.
You know, we moved to Utah 2 years ago, and everybody talked about how much it snowed here. I don't think it's snowed since we moved here. So,
So it's all your fault then,
yeah,
huh?
it's all my fault. It's really kind of a bummer because one of the reasons we moved here was because I really wanted more snow in my life, more consistent snow in my life. And Idaho doesn't get a lot of snow consistently. We end up getting like snowmageddons every 10 years or something, but no annual snowfall that I was happy about. And here there's supposed to be annual snowfall, but man, this year it's like 50 degrees outside right now.
Yeah, it's been crazy warm. We've been 70 degrees in January. I mean, that happens here, but we've had a
Yeah,
lot of one or two snowstorms this year.
yeah. Unfortunately, there's a lot of unique weather events that have come together to form a perfect storm of crap.
Well, great. Well, I appreciate you being on the show. Tell us a little about yourself, the important stuff people want to know about you.
I write military science fiction, and I love doing it. It's nice to be able to do the thing that you love most in life. I always wanted to do something with my life other than work behind a desk, and for somebody else, anyways. Now I work behind a desk for me, but at least it's my desk and my computer and my blood, sweat, and tears. I love writing science fiction. I love telling stories. I have written 3 series in my time as a writer over the last 8 years. The first two were superhero series I wrote independently, and then used the success of those to get in with a publisher and pitch them a military sci-fi series, which is my big breakout series that was nominated for a Dragon Award back in 22. And yeah, it's an exciting journey to be doing a thing that very few people get to do for a living. As they're living. Lots of people write, but very few people get to write for a living, and it's been pretty amazing. I love doing it, and I've got a very supportive spouse and wife who loves me very much, and she does all my covers, so it helps out.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, she's an amazing artist. She was an artist before I was ever a writer, and she used to do graphics designs for computers, and she did art for video games like The Sims. And then when I started writing, she had already been doing book covers, and we talked extensively about what I thought would make book covers really pop out to people and sell. And so she was able to bring that to life. And the publisher liked it so much that they contracted her to do all the books in the series. So all the book covers are her covers that she did, hand painted. Well, digitally painted, but painted all the same. And she's amazing. Her website is vividcovers.com, and it's RM Haskell. So shout out to her. Wouldn't be here without her.
Has
And
she done any other covers for anyone else?
yeah, she's done covers for Craig Martell. She's done thriller covers. She's done mostly sci-fi and fantasy covers, but she's out. She's done a few. I think at this point she's done over 1,000 book covers over
Oh,
the course
wow.
of her career, and she does a ton for Athon. They regularly buy her covers to put on science fiction and fantasy books that they publish, which they're the biggest sci-fi publisher in the world right now. While there are ones that get bigger headlines, nobody publishes more science fiction and fantasy than they do, and makes more sales at it. I mean, they sell a lot of books. They've got writers. I don't know if you ever heard of the He Who Fights Monsters, Shirtaloon, or Seth Green. They just Rick Partlow. They've just got bestseller after bestseller after bestseller, and they do a really great job. They're just one of the best publishers. I can't imagine working with anybody else.
So you're a big sci-fi and comic book fan. So I saw their Spider-Man, and I'm wearing my Spider-Man shirt today. So, what was it about Spider-Man that drew you to him, and how long have you been a fan of Spider-Man? Does that go back to your teen years when you were a
Oh,
young man?
actually, it goes back further than that. I learned to read on Amazing Spider-Man.
Wow.
So I lived in a remote rural town in Oregon when I was a little kid, and there was no kindergarten there, and so this lady would come out to our house once a week or once a month. I can't remember. I was pretty young, and she would help me with my reading, and then we'd go into town, and it was 1978, 79, and comic books were a quarter. And I'd buy a Spider-Man comic book, and I really wanted to know what was going on, and so I learned to read because I wanted to read Spider-Man. And Peter always resonated with me in every possible way. He's this guy who just he's nothing. There's nothing special about Peter other than who he is and his powers. You know what I mean? Obviously, his powers are
Yeah.
special, but I mean, Peter lives with the constantly trying to do the right thing, and he's always getting beaten up and succeeding regardless. And I love everything about him. And so I read Spider-Man my whole life, and they managed to kick me loose as a fan in 2006 when they did the One More Day storyline. And after that I just stopped reading, unfortunately. But everything up to that was amazing. It was great. I love Spider-Man. So, and I see all the movies, and I'll watch the cartoons and stuff because he's just fantastic. The character itself is great. I just I had a unique childhood. My family life wasn't the best, and my parents got divorced at a young age, and or I was young anyways. And so there are a couple of fictional role models I have, and one of them was Peter and MJ being my relationship role model. I know fictional, I know, but I mean, like, I didn't have a real one to go off of. So when they broke them up, I was just like, oh, that's stupid. I'm done.
So, which of the movie Spider-Mans did you like of the three, the major? Well, yeah, three.
No, I liked all of them. Here's the
Yeah,
thing: is like nothing. I couldn't tell you any one was the best. I
yeah,
can tell you that Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker is the best Peter Parker,
yeah,
and I feel like what's his name? Andrew Garfield's Spider Man was the best because
yeah.
they're different. They're different characters.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like Pete is Pete and Spidey is Spidey, and while they're the same person, he acts entirely different as Spider Man than he does as Peter Parker. And I felt like Toby's Peter Parker was great, but his Spider Man was a little too much like him, like Tobey Maguire, like his Peter Parker. And then with Andrew Garfield, his Peter Parker was too much like his Spider Man, but his Spider Man was great, right? But his Peter Parker was sarcastic and witty and all the things that Peter Parker never was. And I feel like Tom Holland's like the middle road. He does a good job at both of those things. Um, he's a pretty good Peter Parker and he's a pretty good Spider Man. And overall his movies are the stories in his movies are really good. So I'll take it. And they get it right. They get him right. The important thing is they get the character right and they get the things that make him great right. And they did in all those movies. And I really love that.
And of course, they brought them all together in the last one. They brought them back through the.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing.
Yeah,
I
and even
really
Doc Ock came back too. So
yeah. The villains in the first movie and the Vulture were probably the best villains that they had.
yeah,
Um, Michael Keaton's Vulture was pretty great, and
yeah.
that was really exciting to see all of them together in that last movie. The flaws
Well,
aside,
I was really amazed with the Doc Ock one, though, the original with the second movie in there, and how they did that. Because I mean, they showed that, and they were using, wires and stuff. It wasn't a lot of it wasn't digital. They were just actually like almost like puppeteers
I
of
don't think
some.
any of it was digital. I think they had like 12 people running the
Yeah,
arms at any given time, and the suit weighed hundreds of pounds. And
yeah.
yeah, it was back in the days of practical effects. You couldn't do a lot of CGI.
It was pretty amazing. So so you love sci-fi? So obviously, got to probably be Star Wars, Star Trek, all those. I mean, what are the sci-fis that you always enjoyed so much?
Well, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a movie or TV show that was sci-fi that I absolutely didn't like. There are things about every sci-fi movie, TV show that I loved. But at the end of the day, I'm a writer of books, and there are things that books do that movies and TV shows can't do, and nor should they try.
Right.
When movies and TV shows try to be books, they're boring, and when books try to be movies and TV shows, they're hollow.
Right.
And so there's just a huge difference. And I know a lot of people get into writing because they can't get into filmmaking. And and I'm one of them. I mean, like when I was a kid, who didn't want to make movies? But you get to a point where you realize, oh, okay, you don't get to do that. That's just not a thing. As hard as it is to get published in this world, it's 10 times harder to get a movie made. So that's not a thing you get to do. Um, so when I started really getting into writing books, the all my favorite novels growing up, and I read a lot, was like Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers and Orson Scott Card's Ender's Games, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, uh, Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End. Just the list goes on. I mean, Dune, all the great science fiction novels. I'm a huge fan of the pulp science fiction of Buck Rogers. I didn't really care for the TV show too much, but I liked it enough. But I really love the books. I just really love that character, and all the usual suspects for sci-fi. Ben Bova's Orion series, and then in the '90s when David Weber started publishing Honor Harrington, I just devoured those. And that's a lot of what led me to write Rhythms of War and Against All Odds, was that I got to the end of David's books and I was like, this was probably 2001 or 2002 when I first started thinking about a military sci-fi story that I wanted to write. I got to the end of his books that he'd written to that point, like 8 of them, and I was just like, well, who else writes naval military sci-fi, with ships? Because I love ships, Robotech and Star Trek through the Enterprise and SDF-1 and the Battleship Yamato and Space Battleship Yamato and all those Star Blazers and stuff. I love all the hero ships. Millennium Falcon, the Vipers from Battlestar Galactica. The Galactica, that kind of thing. And to my surprise, there aren't any. At the time, there weren't any. There were no other Space Navy, books to read. There was Star Trek, Star Wars, and David Weber's Honor Harrington series. And I am not as good a writer as David, so I wasn't going to sit down and write 18th century British, Navy in space like he does to a just beautiful degree. Not to mention the fact that his knowledge of science is just outstanding, and he himself is just a really knowledgeable, really fantastic writer. And if you haven't read the Honor Harrington series and you like military sci-fi, I absolutely recommend them. They are the gold standard for military sci-fi. And so when I started, jotting down ideas for what I wanted, I'm an American. David's an American too, but I have a love. I was in the Army. I have a love for the U.S. military, and so I looked at like what would the U.S. Navy be like in the future in space, the way he did it with the British Navy. And so I spent probably a decade just collecting information and preparing to write this big military series that I wanted to write. And then when I sat down to write it, I was a crappy writer. And so I was like, well, I gotta get better at this. I can't publish this crap. I mean, I'll go into be laughed out of my genre that I love, military sci-fi, that is my bread and butter. I will be laughed out of it by all the people who I've grown up reading and thinking they were just amazing. And so I started writing other things to like, I wrote short stories and I wrote novellas and I wrote a urban fantasy series trying to figure out how to write a character that people would really like. And I wrote, and it got published. It was under a pen name, but it got published. It was the first book I wrote for publication, anyways. And it got picked up, and I wrote a whole trilogy, and it did really well. And then I wrote Arsenal, and I wrote Wraith, and those did phenomenally. And at the time, it was 2017, 2018. There's kind of like an indie renaissance of sci-fi and military sci-fi, and I could have jumped into it then, but there were so many books, and I was like, I'm never going to get seen. And so I waited. And then in 2019, after 9 Arsenal novels and 4 Wraith novels, I approached Aethon Books, and I was like, hey, I've got this idea for a great idea for military sci-fi. It's Sherlock Holmes in space kind of thing, where he's this character. She's just amazingly smart and intelligent, and she aces all the academy stuff, and she's brilliant. And Aethon's like, we love this. We want you to write it, but would you consider making it changing the protagonist from a woman to a man? And I was like, no, of course not. I won't do that. I'm not going to sully my art with your request. And they're like, well, listen. They're like, we love female protagonists, but male protagonists outsail female protagonists 60-1 in audiobooks. And 60, that's 60. to one, and that was really kind of eye opening. And so I ended up reworking the whole story, and it actually ended up being for the best because not that that wasn't a good idea, not that that wasn't a good character, but I feel like when we're challenged, when our ideas are challenged, we don't just grab the first thing that we come up with. That's when we get our really best stuff. My wife calls it the low hanging fruit. Don't go for the low hanging fruit. Come up with different ideas. And so yeah, that's when I came up with Jacob Grimm, and the whole story just fell into place so much better. And Athon was a very supportive publisher, and amazing at everything they do, from be it from the um, advertisement to the actual publishing experience.
So did you write a strong female like sidekick or something in there to add with the Grimm
Well,
character? Or-
there are various characters throughout the books. It ended up being what I call an epic military sci-fi. They're probably there are dozens throughout the. I've written 8 of them now, and I'm working on number 9. And throughout all of them, there are dozens of characters. Jacob has multiple different first officers throughout the series, and I don't. I really try not to stick to one stereotype of a character. You know what I mean? Like there are women who are there's a really popular Marine character named Gunny Jennings, and she's from a planet that has a very thick atmosphere and a very high gravity, which gives her stronger, denser muscles and bones and better oxygen. But she ends up being pretty short about it. And then there's other characters like his love interest, who's a spy, much more subtle, much more uh, mischievous. Not so much the strong military character. And then there are so there's just a lot of different both male and female characters in the books for everybody. So you're not going to go through and be like, oh, all these women are like strong, independent women. Some of them are, some of them aren't, and all these men are not like macho alpha men. Some of them are, some of them aren't. I try to give characters wants and needs and relatable attributes, good and bad. Sometimes the villains are people like you look at the villains and you're like, wow, that I like that guy. I mean, there are villains I've written where I'm like, man, I hate to kill this guy. I really admire him. He's in a terrible situation, and he's forced to do terrible things, for honor and duty. And he's on the wrong side of stuff. But I understand why he's doing the things that he's doing. This is Amelia, by the way.
Hi, Amelia. So yeah, that's good. You do have to have that. And obviously, if you're on a spaceship, a military spaceship, you got to have those brains too. You got the tech people that are probably handling all the military technology involved to fly those ships too.
Well, there's a common misconception in movies and TV shows and books when talking about the military that everybody there is somehow not either not there by choice or because I grew up in the all volunteer military, so there hasn't been a draft since I was a baby. I don't even know if the draft was running in '73 when I was born, to be honest. And so there's this idea that somehow people who join the military, they couldn't do anything else, they're just too stupid or whatever. And this just could be further from the truth. Most people who join the military are doing it out of a love of country and service and duty and things like that. For the same reason people become firefighters and policemen. And there are other reasons. Some people do it because it's a job, and some people do it because their family did it, their parents did it. That's totally normal. But the idea that people there are stupid, not even remotely. Every officer you meet in the military has a bachelor's degree. They have to. You can't become an officer without a bachelor's degree. Mm-hmm. Every NCO has an equivalent of a bachelor's degree in training, so in their field, whatever that is. And so you've got all these people on this ship that are all highly specialized, the people who run the computers, the people who run engineering. And a lot of times they're 18, 19 years old, and they went to school for 6 weeks or 6 months to do this. But in those 6 months, they learned more about those systems than a civilian would in 6 years of schooling. Can they do anything else? No. But they're very good at what they do. And so it's a lot of fun to write all these different kinds of characters. And some of them are brave, and some of them aren't. And some of them some of them are interested in other things, and some people are there because they're there for a career, and some people are there because they needed a job. And I try not to fall into that trap of having all the characters have the same motivation, having all the characters have the same reason for being there. Everybody is a different person, and one of the fan favorite characters is this kid Josh Mendez. He starts off as a spacer and ends up being a petty officer in the last book, and he runs the galley. And he wasn't intending to be in the military his whole life, but he ended up falling in with Captain Grimm, and Grimm is one of those very inspirational type characters who, if I had run into Grimm when I was in the military, I'd still be in the military because he's the kind of officer you'd want to follow forever. So it really depends on, which character we're talking about at any given time, and, what side of the war they're on, and what kind of ship they're on. And not everybody in the Alliance are these golden boy good guys doing the right thing always, and not everybody on the bad guy side is evil incarnate, though some of them are, because there are evil people in the world. And some of the guys on the good side are bad, and some of the guys on the good side are good, because there are good people in the world. Just gotta make that sample and allow readers the opportunity to explore it and see it and add their own input to it. I get a lot of conflicting reviews, which is really good. I mean, it's actually a really good thing to get conflicting reviews. To get a review that says this book is super sanctimonious and ridiculous, and then another review in the same on the same book that will say something like, I really felt for this book, and I really felt like these characters were real people, and I really believed in what they were saying and doing. And that's me leaving room for the audience in a story, which is something books do that better than anything, because books live in people's heads. They're not visual. You're not like watching it and then it's over. And even though there are movies you think about for a long time, um, books you live, you feel about for a long time.
So you mentioned we were talking backstage before the show about you had won a journalism award. So do you have a journalism background? Is that how you kind of uh, perfected your craft through the journalism, or how did that come about?
Kind of. I wanted to be a writer from a young age. And a lot of writers, you hear that a lot. I've always wanted to be a writer. I had some problems I didn't realize I had until I was in my 40s when my career really kicked off. One of them is I'm dyslexic, and
Oh,
so
it's a challenge.
yeah, and
Yeah,
not realizing you're dyslexic, you just end up being told over and over again you're stupid because you can't spell.
right.
And so once I figured that out and learned how to cope with it, things got a lot easier. I did journalism when I got out of the Army because I was really interested in the truth, and I got into journalism, won this award, and then as I got closer to a journalism career, realized that they were the furthest thing from telling the truth that was possible. This was 99, 98, 99, and there was no, independent journalism back then, which I probably would have done if I was doing this today. So I did not pursue that career. I went the other direction, which was I do help desk. I did help desk technologies and computer technologies for 20 years, customer service, fixing people's computers and stuff over the phone.
Sure. Well, you and I got a similar background because that's what I did for most of my life too. So, started out with Windows 3.1 and
Well, that's because I don't know if you remember this, but in the 80s, the government
Bossy.
pushed all this commercials constantly on us during the after school specials that were like in the year 1995, the government, the U.S. is going to need 225,000 computer techs. Go to computer school today, And so, a lot of us, won't believe how many people I meet who are around my age who have the same exact story of like, well, I got out of whatever I was doing and I just started working on computers because, that's what I had always done. And turns out they didn't need that many computer techs. One of my big, so 2009 or 2010, I was working for T-Mobile as a help desk technician, and when all the stuff happened around that time, and desperately wanted a different job. But where I was living at the time, there was also a chip factory. I forget the name of the chip maker, but they laid off something like 3,000 computer techs, all with master degrees and PhDs and whatnot. I'm like, oh, I'm never getting a job at the help desk now. So, but that's all right because it all worked out for the best. I use a lot of my computer skills in my writing, and I'm really good with technology, and I spent years supporting Microsoft Office for working for Microsoft. So I know Word backwards and forwards, and so it worked out really well. I can't complain. And I married the love of my life, and I have 6 great kids.
Well, and I would imagine working in the computer field, being dyslexic, that's obviously a challenge as well to have to overcome some of that.
Yeah, I have a slightly unusual form of dyslexia. There's like 6 different forms of dyslexia. The most common one is that you see words reversed, letters reversed. I don't ever
Oh,
see
really?
anything reversed. I write them reversed
Oh,
constantly. Um, and I write words reversed. So like I will put the words in the wrong order in a
right.
sentence, or I'll put the letters in the wrong order in a word, and my brain will unscramble it. Like I'm extraordinarily good at reading those things where people are like, "Hey, if you can read this, you're this, that, or the other thing." Like, no, I'm just dyslexic. I can read that like nobody's business. Where none of the words are spelled right, but you still know what it says. I can
Yeah,
read those very well because my brain fixes all of it for me. Unfortunately, it also does it when I'm writing. And
right.
then I have this thing where my brain will just convince me that I'm spelling the word right, even though I am spelling it wrong. And 5 minutes later, if I'm looking at it, I'll be like, oh, I spelled that. What? No, that's a homophone. I spelled that completely the wrong way. That's not the right kind of word. But in the moment, the form of dyslexia I have, makes that seem like the right thing, the real thing. And it's really frustrating. Anybody listening, if you have dyslexia and you want to be a writer, it is not the end of the world. You have to do 2 things, and they're very important things. And this baby is going to interrupt me when I try to tell you what they are. One, you write in Comic Sans. Makes a huge difference.
Oh, really?
Every font, every letter in Comic Sans is a unique letter. So a lot of times in fonts, when you have a line for the P, a line for the L, a line for the N, they're all the same line.
Right.
But each letter in Comic Sans is unique. It doesn't use the same line. So if you put a P, an L, and an N, and you juxtapose those on top of each other, all right, superimpose those on top of each other, you would not see the same line. It makes a huge difference. And the other thing is to write on a pink background, a very light pink background. It makes your brain work harder to figure out what it's seeing. And by doing that, I reduced the number of typos I had by like 80%. And, that still leaves a lot of typos, but it made my life so much easier. And ultimately is what helped me, write at the volume that I write at and the number of books that I've written. And I still get complaints about typos, and I'm really sorry. There's only so much my editors can do, and there's only so many editors I can hire. I have 3. I have one main editor, an editor provided by Athon, and a typo hunter who does line edits for me, and they still get through. And there's just on the flip side, I've never read a book in my entire life that didn't have at least one typo in it.
Oh, yeah.
Trad pub and everything.
Yeah,
So
even the big guys, you'll read the big name authors that have these huge contracts and stuff, and you'll still find something once in a while in their manuscript, and you go, "Oh, I think that's a typo," but
And despite all of that, I still somehow have a 4.7 rating on Amazon, 4.5 on Goodreads, and 25,000 reviews or so over 8 books.
well, yeah. And I was impressed when I looked and saw how many reviews you had for your books. That's very very nice. You obviously have a big following. So okay, so you kind of gave us a little bit about your series, the one you're working on now, and I'm gonna throw the cover up there. That's book one. So you said you've always wanted to do military type of space fiction, fairly unique. So how is it? Does your mind work? I always think of sci-fi. I'm thinking now these are humans. I'm assuming, right, that are
Yeah, there are
flying.
no aliens in it.
Yeah,
Um, we have a lot of conflicts here on Earth between humans,
yeah.
and I'm scientifically minded enough that if I wanted to come up with an alien species, I'd have to really come up with it. And at the end of the day, in order for them to be relatable to people who are reading the book, I'd have to make them basically just humans in a skin suit. And I don't want to do that. So I have it be among humans. Same old conflicts, just in space.
Just in space. Huh? So a lot of this stuff is taking place out in space. So is it around Earth, or are they going further out into space? Or
I love far future sci-fi as much as I
Mhm.
enjoy Robotech. I really like the stuff that takes place. Like Star Trek is 200-300 years in the future. Grimm's War is 1,000 years in the future,
Mhm.
and I don't explain at any point, for the most part, what happens between now and then. There's no future history written. There's no characters discussing at length, ad nauseum, the history of the future. There's some mentions of things that happened along the way, but I mostly just leave it for the audience to figure out, fill in the blanks if they want to. But it's the book. The first book takes place in 2933. 2931 is when the book starts, but there's a time jump, or almost right away. And forgive me for the time jump. It was just unavoidable. I don't normally agree with time jumps, but in this case, it worked. Yeah, yeah. And the I like the far future setting because it lets me do things without having to relate them to today.
Yeah.
And there's no, I mean, I do it without pop culture. There's no pop culture references because why would there be? Do we talk about things that happened 1,000 years ago today? No, not really, not unless you're history buff. Um, the so the big thing is like I figured out like where in the galaxy everybody went. Where did they colonize? Who colonized? Why? What places? Who got there first? That kind of thing. And so there's all these different ethnic, cultural, religious groups spread throughout the whole galaxy, and they've come together and they formed different factions. I call them nations and countries because what else am I going to call them? I'm not going to use star systems because they're bigger than just one star system. And the main character, he's part of what's called the United Systems Alliance, which is a group of, when the book starts, 19 systems that have come together to for the common good. And there's another organization, another nation called the Consortium, and then there's one called the Caliphate, and there's one called the Iron Empire, and then the Terran Republic, and that's the one that's on Earth, but we're not on Earth in the books at all. The closest we get is there's one book that takes place on a colony that's on the border between the Alliance and the Terran Republic. I wanted to avoid being on Earth in the future. I wanted to do something, really new and let me be me and not be beholden to what has been done in the past. So, the United Systems Alliance has got a lot of different cultures in it, and I can really explore that with like, well, this one planet was colonized mostly by North Americans, and there's this other planet that was colonized almost exclusively by Texans, and another one that was colonized by a small group of Shinto Japanese, because they didn't want to go with all the other, religiously Buddhist Japanese to the colonies that the Japanese were doing, and so you end up with this sort of mishmash of different peoples and cultures and religions that to me is very interesting. What brings people together and has have them work for a common defense, if not if not culture and if not religion, it's almost always proximity.
So I'm assuming is there a big fleet of ships there? He's on a main ship there.
No, he's on a destroyer. It's called the
Yeah.
USS Interceptor, and it's a
Right.
hero ship. It's throughout pretty much the whole series. It's just an old, battered destroyer that he has a situation in the first book where he does everything right, and he saves the day, he saves lives, and he still gets crucified for it.
Yeah.
And anybody who's ever been in corporate life or been in the military, that is absolutely something that can happen.
Sure.
And he doesn't do what the Navy would consider the right thing by resigning and quitting. He stays in. And at one point, the Naval Command kind of needs a scapegoat. They need a disposable officer to command this ship in the hopes that he will get in trouble so that they can do some political maneuvering. And so they give him the interceptor. But nobody told him he was disposable. So he just does his job and, exposes a whole bunch of corruption and piracy and human trafficking and, saves the day.
So right now you have 8 books out, and you've got a ninth book that you're working on.
Comes out in April. It's called The Longest Battle.
Longest Battle.
Now,
And
this one you're looking at right now is the Barnes and Noble cover. So if you walk into any Barnes and Noble in the nation, you should be able to buy this book, or at least have them order it for you. Please do. That will help me a lot. But you can also buy the ebook or audiobook on Amazon and Audible.
so then when did the first book come out?
Uh, April of 2022.
So you put
So,
out quite a few books in that time then. If you're on book
yeah,
9, you were doing a couple a year, it looks like,
I
huh?
was. I did. Well, Athon has a thing where Athon only publishes you once you have the first three books written. So in 2022, three books came out. In 2023, three books came out. And then in 2024 and 25, one book came out each. Uh, Life has been interesting the last couple of years. And so my pace slowed down. And it's picking back up again. So there should be more than one book coming out this year. But yeah, 8 books in 3 years is pretty good. Now, I have a buddy, Rick Partlow, who writes the Drop Trooper series, and he writes a bunch of other books like Accidental Astronaut. He's amazing. He writes a book a month, and he's just in the industry. Like, we all joke about him. We'll say stuff like, "Well, I write a lot of books, but I'm no Rick Partlow." And he's a really good sci-fi writer. I mean, if you like science fiction, definitely check him out.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, are these fairly big books too that he writes in a month?
80 to
Because sci-fi
100,000
usually
words.
is
Yeah.
fairly long.
Yeah, 80 to 100,000 words. He
Wow.
has a very strict work ethic. He writes 3,000 words a day, whether he wants to or not. And he doesn't stop until he gets those 3,000 words. And if it's 1 a.m. when he gets his 3,000 words, it's 1 a.m. However, he's also retired and has no children living at home.
Yeah, makes it a little more difficult when you've got the little one in your arms trying to type, right? So,
A little bit. I get up at 5 or 6 in the morning every morning to get 1,000 or 1,500 words in before everybody gets up. And then sometimes I'll get a few hundred words in throughout the rest of the day, but that's about it. So it takes me a little bit longer to write. And my books are fairly, not that other people's books aren't complex, but mine are third person and there's multiple POVs and there's a lot going on. There's not one story. There's one main story, but there's lots of subplots and lots of political intrigue. And like I said, one of the characters is a spy, so there's almost always a spy subplot. I've got Marines, and so there's usually a Marine subplot where they're on the ground fighting and or boarding enemy ships. There's lots going on. It just while Jacob Grimm is definitely the main character without a doubt, he's not the only character, and he's not the only person who does stuff. He's just the person who makes things happen.
so do you foresee continuing this series? You've got book 9. How many more books do you think's going to come out of this?
Well, I'll give you. There's two answers to that. I'll give you the answer that I like, which is as long as Athon keeps giving me contracts,
Right.
which means as long as people keep buying them.
Right.
I'm currently contracted through book 12.
Okay.
The real answer, though, is closer to I could keep doing them forever. The pace may slow down.
Yeah.
You're a writer. You know how it is. You write the same characters, the same books.
Sure.
You get 5 or 6 books in, it starts getting difficult. And while the stories are still good and the characters are still good, it takes longer to get to that level than it did in the past. And that's because you're running out of all the easily accessible stories in your brain, all the easily accessible ideas. And you have to really start reaching for them. Book 9 took me 2 months to outline, and that was after thinking about it for 7 months. And so now the writing is going really, really fast. I'm doing, the writing is a breeze. I'm like 25,000 words, 30,000 words into the book right now, and it'll be done no problem. But coming up with a story and the outline and doing something that builds on what has come already, does it all justice, serves all the characters that people want to be have served. One of the things that you can't really understand, and you've written a long series, so you know this, you can't really understand until you've done it, is that at a certain point, the characters have things that need to happen that the fans want to have happen. And I don't mean like fan service. I mean like I've got this Gunnery Sergeant Jennings. She's the one from High Gravity World. If there's a book where she doesn't beat somebody up or use her dagger to kill somebody, a bad guy obviously, or shoot somebody, the fans are going to notice and they're not going to be happy about it. and rightly so, because that's what they expect, and I like to give them what they want, even if it's not necessarily the way they think that they want it. If Jacob doesn't give a good speech about duty and honor and sacrifice toward the end of the book, then I'm gonna hear about it, and you've got to you grow into these expectations from the fans, and a lot of times authors will be like, "Oh, I just write my own thing. I don't even think about what the fans want." That's great. If that works for you, that's fantastic. My fans spend their hard-earned money on my books. I'm not going to ignore what I think that they need, even if it's not necessarily what they want. So a lot of times people will be like, "Oh, we want this to happen and we want that to happen," and in my brain I'll be like, "No, you don't. What you need is for these characters to behave in the way that you have come to grow them to behave. You don't need specific things for them to do. You need them to be heroic. You need them to be sacrifice things. You need them to take leaps of faith and challenges. People never know what they want, but they always think they know what they want. I want these two characters to get together, or I want this big fleet thing to happen. No, no, no. What you need is you need there to be romance in the books. You need there to be people who are who love life and are have emotions. You don't necessarily need there to be a specific pairing. Anyways, that's my thoughts on it. It takes a while, It
Well,
takes,
when you have a long running series like that, you can really develop those storylines over time. I always found it difficult, and I have 3 series myself. I've always found it difficult. People write a standalone that's just one thing, and I'm like, how do you pack all of that into the one book? Because I like spreading those things out across, the development of the characters and everyday life in effect. So that's great.
yeah, absolutely, and to a degree, these books are all standalone books. Ignore any review that says there are cliffhangers in these books. There are specifically not cliffhangers in these books. My publisher would murder me if I put a cliffhanger in these books. Um, and so sometimes I'll get reviews, and I feel like the person who wrote the review wanted to be an author or is an author, and they're like trying to flex their knowledge about it, and like introducing a new story element for the next book at the end of a book is not a cliffhanger. But anyways, so they are all standalone. I mean, you theoretically could pick up any of the books and read them out of order if you wanted to, for some strange reason, like if you were a psychopath and you wanted to read them out of order, you could and still understand them.
Yeah.
But I don't recommend
Yeah. So obviously, it sounds like you're a plotter. You said you spent 2 months plotting this book you're working on now. So there sound like there must be pretty detailed
it took me a
outlining.
long time to figure out how to outline right. I was a pantser from all my early books.
Yeah.
Like all the Arsenal and Wraith books, I just sat down and started writing. One of the Arsenal books, I was like, okay, this book has to have aliens in it. Go. Because
There you go.
that's a comic book trope, right?
Right.
You have at some point aliens invade. Done.
Right.
Um, and so, but with these books, like I said, multiple POVs,
Right.
multiple contradictory plot lines happening. You got the enemies and you got the good guys, and there's a lot happening. At a certain point, like if you're pantsing a 50 or 60,000 word novel, that's relatively easy to do. One POV, first person, pretty easy. I mean, relatively speaking. I mean, it can be hard, but relatively speaking.
Yeah.
120,000 word novel, 9 speaking characters, multiple plots and subplots. I can't keep it all in my head. There has to be something on paper telling me where to go and what to do next. And so it took me a long time though. I was our diehard pantser, and it took me so long to figure out plotting and outlining. And I feel like this book, the one I'm working on right now, I finally got it like nailed down to a science.
And do you strictly stick to that outline, or do you sometimes vary off depending on how the writing goes?
It just depends. I wish I could say I could just write strictly from the outline and do, and never vary. But when you're in the writing mode, you often are in this thing called open mode, where it's just like the ideas are flowing and you come up with something way better than you have when you outlined,
Yeah.
and you do yourself a disservice if you don't go with it. So
Okay.
I do vary, but what I try to do is when that happens is create a new outline from that point forward and work on that, work from that. But it usually doesn't happen. The thing is like the plot is mostly what the outline is for. The plot is pretty simple. The story is how your characters deal with the plot. The story is what changes necessarily, not necessarily what the plot is. Plots relatively don't change. But how they deal with things, like I'll think they'll deal with it one way, and then we'll get halfway in. I'll be like, oh no, they're going to deal with it this way,
Right.
and that changes things quite a bit. That's also the interesting part of the book for the readers because who cares about the plot? Nobody talks about their favorite book and goes, well, in the plot of the book. No, they talk about characters and they talk about the story and what the characters did.
Well, and we got about 15 minutes left here, so that's what I ask everybody. Bringing life to characters is the name of the show. So, what do you do to get those characters? And you talked about it a little bit earlier about what you try to do, but when you're developing those characters, and you have a long-standing series, so you have a lot of the same characters coming back, but I'm sure you're introducing new characters in as you go along as well. So,
I try to, yeah.
yeah.
I would love to write about the same characters, but when you're writing in a semi-realistic environment, like say a Navy, you can't justify having the same people on the same ship year in and year out. It's different for a captain. They could be captains of a ship for years, decades, sometimes, but you can't really justify having the same 18-year-old kid at the helm or whatever. People come and go. Now I do keep a lot of my NCOs over the years because they also can stay on a ship for a long time. But officers and enlisted, they all change a lot. So, and sometimes you'll see the characters grow. Like I think characters start off as a midship, and you got to see them as lieutenant commander, and that's the last time you got to see them. They moved on to other ships and stuff, but mostly character is really interesting concept. Like, there really is no character. What is character? What we really have is like the idea of how do I decide what a fictional character I do would make? How do I decide what decision he would make in any given situation that feels like consistent? Like how do you make it feel consistent? Because when you're reading a book or you're watching a movie and characters do things because the plot demands it, it's really obvious. It's really obvious. You're like, that guy would never do that. That girl would never make that decision. Um, One of my favorite go-tos is I like that new Battlestar Galactica. I could have done without all the sex, but I like the new Battlestar Galactica right up until episode 4. And it opens with Starbucks sleeping with Baltar. Never would have happened. Not that kind of person. They had nothing to suggest that she was that kind of person. He was a weasel. She would have no respect for him and never did in the entire series. It would never have happened. And I was like, okay, clearly this writer doesn't know anything about these characters. He's just throwing things up the screen to see what sticks. You've got to write your characters in a way that when they make the decision they make, the readers are not surprised by the decision they make. They're just surprised by how they made the decision or what the results of the decision are. But you shouldn't read a book and be like, wow, I can't believe the character did that. Well, you knew if you're doing it right, you knew he was going to do it. Oh, you can't believe this hero stood up in front of a bullet and took it for somebody else? Shock. What you then have to figure out is why. Why? And it's really a lot more difficult question than you might think. My first book that I wrote that will never see the light of day was a superhero novel. And this girl got superpowers and became a superhero. And my wife said, why? Like, because she got superpowers. That's not a reason. Why? Boy, I didn't have a reason. I did not have a reason. And so when I was writing Grimm's War, why did Jacob join the Navy? Why did he stay in it? Why did he not quit? Why did he persevere through all the humiliation and degradation that the Navy piled on him when he made the decision he made? That was the decision that anybody in his position honestly would have made. What he did wasn't anything special. It was how he responded to it that was special. He didn't quit. Why didn't he quit? And knowing that answer is what makes him a character, is what forms his character. And once you know who he is, you're not surprised by any of the decisions he makes throughout the entire, 8 or 9 books. What will surprise you is the results or the clever ideas he comes up with along the way, but not the decision to act, not the decision to defend people, not the decision to be the only person standing between his people and the bad guys and saying, no, you don't get to go any further. This is it. And if it costs me my life, it costs me my life. But that's the decision I made a long time ago. Because ultimately, all people have made all of these decisions long before it becomes necessary to make them in the moment. In my, I'm LDS, and in my faith, we talk about making the little decisions every day so that when you're faced with a big decision, you've already made the right decision 100 times. So you're not forced at that moment to decide what the right decision is. You already know what it is, and you can make it because you're in a habit of making the right decisions. And that's how it is in the military. That's how it is in fighting, in martial arts, in competition shooting. You've already made the decision. Now you just have to execute it in a way that works. If you wait until the moment where you're faced with adversity, the moment you're faced with a challenge, the moment you're faced with making a moral choice to make the decision, then you're going to make the wrong one. You have to make it before, and that's how I get the characters the way I get them. No one is surprised. Jacob has a moral code. He sticks to it no matter what. Gunny Jennings, she joined the Marine Corps to get away from a terrible family life and a terrible home planet, and she wants to be the best that she can be. And so every time there's a situation where like you think that like, okay, well, what's Jennings going to do now? Well, you just have to think, well, what would be the best situation? What would be what would the best Marine do in this situation? That's what she'll do. I've got an engineer who used to be a black market guy, and knows all about the ins and outs of stealing things and selling things and the drug trafficking and all that stuff. And but he turned his life around, and so you always know when he's making a decision, he has all this access to all this knowledge, but he's never gonna make a decision that would lead him back to that life. So it's just you build your characters the way you build your own character, a little piece at a time, until you have all these big pieces, and then they write themselves really. And when you vary from that, when you veer off from that character, you've done it, and you're like, oh, I got to go back. They would never have done that.
So, are any of these characters based on anybody you've known since you were in the military? Do you kind of borrow a little bit from past experience there?
Well, I mean, everybody is an amalgamation of every story, every character you create is an amalgamation of everybody you've ever met.
Mm-hmm.
You can't escape that. I don't know if you ever watched Westworld with Anthony Hopkins, but there's this scene where this writer is telling Anthony Hopkins was the park director, the story director for the park, and his protege was telling him about this story that Westworld's about androids and people come to this theme park that's full of androids. And he's talking about how the ways the guests can abuse these androids and murder them and shoot them and whatever, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, we're going to take them on a journey of self-discovery. And he goes to the Anthony Hopkins. He's like, well, what do you think? And Anthony Hopkins says, I think this story says more about you than it does about our guests. And that's every story. We put ourselves in a story whether we want to or not. So yes, some characters are more people that I've met, and some are less. But all of them are someone I've met, or someone I've interacted with, or someone I've thought about. Or Jacob is the version of me I wish I was. He's if I was writing a D&D book, he'd be a paladin. His girlfriend at the time of the end of the first or end of the second book, Nadia. She's very much a lot based on my wife. She's sarcastic and witty and funny and clever, and so she has a lot of my wife's personality in her, and so you can't really escape that. But no one would read that book and think, oh, this is Jeff, or oh, that's Becky, or oh, this is this drill sergeant I knew once. Some of them are characters from movies. There's a Hicks in there somewhere from Aliens that I love.
Sure. So, Is there some book out there that you want to write that you haven't written yet? Something maybe a different genre, anything? You talked about the one that wouldn't ever see the light of day, but maybe some other ideas churning
Well,
that brain.
I wouldn't say no to writing an epic fantasy with my wife at some point because she's also a writer and
Yeah.
she loves epic fantasy. I don't love it though as much as I love military sci-fi, and I'm a firm believer in that you got to love what you're writing or it's going to show, and in the worst possible way. You will never be a good writer writing something you don't love. But there are books though that I want to write that I haven't written yet. I've got a book series in mind about the USS Enterprise CV-65, the aircraft carrier from 1986. Um, you know, traveling to a different dimension and stuff happening. But that's not really military sci-fi, so it's not really something I can write at the moment. I've got a book series I'm working on that may come out this year called Endless War. That is an Audie Murphy / George Washington in space kind of thing. And I've got a space opera I have been writing for a few years that is just a love letter to Buck Rogers that may come out at the end of the year. I hope, if we're lucky. And then I'll continue to work on military sci-fi. I have an author friend named James Aaron who's writing a spin-off series for Grimm's War called Retreat Hell, and it's about rebuilding of the army for the Alliance as they take worlds from the enemy. It's really good. It's really, really fun to read. And he was a GWAT, or Global War on Terror veteran. He ran Patriot missile batteries during the Iraq, Afghanistan campaigns, and so he's got a really unique perspective on the ground war, and that's what it's all about, is about the ground war. So it should be good. Comes out sometime this year, hopefully. Don't hold me to it because things change. I've written book one of both of my new series, and I got to write two more before I thought we'll publish them in each one.
Right.
So that's 4 books. I'm hoping to
Right.
get them all done this year.
So, do you have any advice? We only got a couple more minutes here, almost on an hour. But do you have any advice to aspiring authors
Yes,
getting into crazy business?
lots of advice. It's hard to give generic advice, because like everybody's very specific in their journey. No one can tell you how to write a book. Like no one can tell you how you write a book. Only writing the book tells you how you write the book, because you don't know what you don't know. And so the first thing you have to do is you have to write a book. Don't write short stories, don't write novellas, write a book. Because all that writing short stories and novellas do for you, for your career anyways, is teach you how to write short stories and novellas. You know, writing a book is a whole different beast. It's a lot different from writing a 10,000 word short story, writing a 100,000 word novel. So write a book and then never ever publish that book. Take what you learn from that book and write another book. And don't be so attached to a book series that you just keep rewriting it over and over again. Just write it and move on. It also depends greatly though. What do you want from writing? Do you want to be a writer? Do you want to sell books and be successful and do this for a living like I do and a lot of other writers I know do? Then you've got to be prolific. If you just want to write because you love writing and you don't care if anybody reads it, then you write however you want. But if you want to be successful, you've got to write books, and you got to keep writing them. And if they don't work, you move on to a new series and you write that one. And if that doesn't work, you just keep doing it until you're an overnight success 10 years in the making. That's how it works. But definitely the key to all of this, though, no matter what kind of writer you want to be, is to write. Michael Jordan famously said that he did not become the world's greatest basketball player by not shooting 1,000 hoops a day, which he did every day from the time he was like 10 until he got into the NBA. Before noon, mind you, 1,000 hoops every day. That is how you become great. You write every day. And you keep writing, and you don't stop. That's pretty much my advice.
Good.
You don't get paid a lot for that advice, though. If I had a system, I would sell it. But the system is you sit down and you write.
Well, and finding the time to write is always a challenge. You get 6 kids. I mean, I'm sure there's times you just got to lock yourself in a room, right? And
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, mostly it's me getting up at 5.
yeah,
My youngest usually gets up around 8, so it gives me like 3 hours to write. And you got to find the time where you can find the time.
yeah,
And you can't. There's always something. This is life, right, man? There's always something happening. The
sure.
world's on fire. The power goes out. You and your wife are having problems. You're, you know, my brother had a stroke last year. There's always something happening.
Right.
You can't stop writing every time something happens, or you'll never write. Just like you can't stop living your life every time something happens, or you'll never live your life. You have to keep going forward. So if you let little things or big things stop you from writing, you're not really ever going to be a writer. But if you say, I'm going to write every day, or at least think about writing every day, and write every day that I physically can, then you will succeed. I don't know when, but you will, because you succeed by persevering.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're at an hour, so I wanted to throw up. So I grabbed this from your
Are
website.
you
So
okay? Do you need some medicine? You want to throw up?
oh, I'm going to throw up the. These are your 3 different series
Yeah.
that you have here, and you said the first 2 were superheroes.
Yep. This is
Yeah.
my first series. Is Arsenal. It's 9 books long. It's about a Tony Stark esque superhero named Amelia Lockhart. She is the world's most brilliant engineer, and she develops the super suit that you see on there to fight with. Interesting things about Amelia is that she was in a car accident when she was 6, so she's in a wheelchair when she's not in her suit. And there's no magic solution to her being paraplegic. She is. And the suit lets her walk and fly and stuff like that. But when she's not in the suit, there's she doesn't have like a magic chip implanted that makes her paraplegia go away.
Yeah.
She's paralyzed. This is Wraith. This is the same series, or same universe. They even cross over
Good.
once in the books. Wraith is a vigilante a la the Punisher, who his family is murdered by human traffickers, and so she ends up making a deal with this entity that's like a demon almost, that gives her superpowers as long as she's killing people. And so there's always a fight between her and the demon. The demon wants her just to kill everybody to feed, to give her powers, and she only wants to kill the bad people. So there's always like a push and pull between them. There are 9 books in Arsenal. There are 5 books in Wraith. The 6th one's coming out eventually. I co-wrote it with somebody. I just got to get around to editing it and stuff. And then the other series that I can't point to is my big series, Grimm's War Against All Odds. That's Jacob T. Grimm and the crew of the USS Interceptor. And there are 8 books. The 9th one comes out in April, and there'll be at least 3 more. And then hopefully, in the future, there'll be a couple more series added on here.
And did your wife do the covers for the other 2 series as well?
All of them, yeah. All of these are done by her. Now, I don't know if she'll be doing all my covers in the future, but for all the covers that make sense, she'll be doing them. Yeah, she painted all of these. My 2 favorite covers are Grim Resolve, which is the one if you're looking at it, the left of Against All Odds, and then my other favorite cover is there's an Arsenal one you can't see called Explosive Arsenal that she did a great job on, and then Welcome Home, Wraith Welcome Home, which is book 2. It has the main character Madison with her red scarf coming out of a portal. I love that one.
Yeah, those covers are great.
She's amazing. I mean, I could do an hour-long podcast praising her.
Well, maybe we'll have to get her on sometime.
She's happy to do it. She's spoken at more conferences than I have.
Yeah.
She was a headliner at Inkers a couple years back, teaching people how to do covers and what makes a good cover. Because really is a science behind it and an art, and it's not just a good image. And she has a whole presentation about it to help people figure out what makes a good book cover.
So there's your website, jeffrey8haskell.com.
And you can find it on Amazon or at Barnes & Noble.
So you're wide. So you're on all the different platforms.
No, not wide.
No?
I'm on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Oh, okay.
So Barnes & Noble is paperback only.
Paperback. Okay.
So you can go to the store and buy it, and you can order it from the website, the paperback from the website. Ebook wise and audiobooks, I'm exclusive to Amazon and Audible, and that's my publisher. That's their deal. I just go where they tell me to go. I did a book signing at Barnes and Noble's, my first one ever, in October. It was awesome. And if I never do another one, that'd be great because I mean that one was great and it was a lot of fun. I hope I get to do more, but that only happens if people buy the book from Barnes and Nobles. So please
And
do.
then you've got, so if you're just exclusive to Amazon, then are you under Kindle Unlimited as well, the
Yes,
subscription service as
yeah,
well?
you can get on Kindle Unlimited, and if you are, I believe I'm not 100% sure on the Audible version of Kindle Unlimited, but you can get the first 3 books for 1 credit on Audible. You can check out all the books under Kindle Unlimited.
Well, I know Amazon Prime now allows you to get like a book occasionally on audio, but I don't know if it's a limited selection or not. But
I know music does too. If you have an
yeah.
Amazon Music subscription, you can get an
Yes.
audiobook, and mine are available there. My superhero novels, their audiobooks are wide. Like if you got Spotify, you can listen to them on Spotify. They're through a different publisher. The audiobooks went through Recorded Books, but the ebooks and the paperback books I self-published. It was me figuring out the whole publishing industry thing and what sells and what works and why. And it's pretty useful to know all those things because it makes it easier to sell books. And I sell a lot of them, so it works out.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah, it's been my goal. It's not every writer's goal, but
Yeah.
I suck at working for other people. I really do. And so working for myself was pretty much the only thing I could do to support my family and maintain my sanity.
Well, the marketing is a challenge too. If and you sounds like you've got a good publisher that helps you out at least with a lot of that. So that's
Yeah,
great.
they do all the marketing for Grimm's of War. I didn't really do any marketing for my superhero stuff. Mostly, I just made sure to target it correctly so that when you saw the books, if you were into superheroes, you would know that that was a book for you. And that really seemed to do the trick. People would see it and they'd buy it, and they would, have really great read through. And that's, you get that when you are telling the right kind of stories to the right kind of people. I'd rather sell 10 books to people who really wanted that book than 100 books to people who didn't, because those 10 people will buy all of the books and those 100 people won't, and they'll leave bad reviews. So you want to just make sure you always sell to the target audience and not to everybody.
Well, and we'll wrap up here, but I was just going to throw one more quick thing. Have you ever thought about doing a graphic novel?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, I figure with your wife having that ability,
Yeah, well, there's ability and there's time, and
time, yeah, it's always
I'm one of many of her clients.
yes.
And as she likes to say, I either get the best deal on covers or the worst deal on covers. But her clients get to tell her what they want on their cover. I just get to tell her I need a new cover.
Got it.
And that's whatever she gives me. I love, and it's wonderful and amazing, and exactly what I wanted. So that's having time for her to do. She's not really into sequential art, and so I have a daughter who is though, and we're working together to try and put something together. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's. I mean, obviously, the what you're writing there would be could be very popular as a graphic novel. So yes, that's
Yeah, and if you're a publisher and you want to publish a superhero series with a built-in fan base,
there you go. All right. Well, great. Well, I think we covered everything. We're a little over an hour here, so but I wanted to say thank you. Appreciate you being on the show. Um, all the best with your new book coming out in, you said March,
April,
May, yeah,
April.
April. I got on either side of it there. So, so coming out. So good luck with that, and hopefully it sells well and get back to get the next one done. Right.
Absolutely. And hey, when your next book comes out, shoot it my way on Facebook, and
Sure.
I'll throw it out there. I don't know how many people who follow me read mysteries, but
Yeah.
there might be somebody.
Sure. Well, I would appreciate that. Thank you, Jeffrey. Appreciate you being on the show, and hopefully we'll run into you somewhere down the road.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you for having me. I really had a good time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thanks everyone. Just a quick. Got my new book coming out, and let's see here if I can get it. Find it there. There it is. I'm Mayhem in Music City. It actually comes out next Tuesday, so that's going to be my new book. It is available on pre-order, so please check it out. Special price, $3.99. Book 11 in the Jarvis Man series. And next week, it's going to be Tuesday night at 6 p.m. And I'm going to have Trisha Copeland on. Trisha, I've known for quite a few years, and looking forward to having her on and chat. We've run into each other at several events through the years, but never sat down and talked for an hour. So it should be a lot of fun. So, but thanks again, and we will see you next Tuesday night.